Massachusetts lawmakers did something last year they hadn't done in the past 20 years. They raised the gas tax. It was just a few pennies, from 21 cents on the gallon to 24 cents. But the new gas tax also includes automatic future increases tied to inflation. And that's a point of contention for supporters of ballot question 1, which would roll back the new gas tax. In tonight's Focus Report, WGBH News reporter Stephanie Leyden gets us up to speed on the gas tax.
When you talk about rolling back the gas tax, you can pretty much guess what people are going to say when they're standing at the pump.
I would vote absolutely to repeal it because, I mean, it's unquestionably completely high, the gas tax.
Adam Barisano lives in Scituate, commutes to Boston, and spends a lot of money on gas.
How much does it cost to fill up your car?
Nissan Maxima, 6-cylinder engine, 295 plus horsepower, and probably about $75 sometimes.
Barisano may want to hold his horses. Question 1 wouldn't get rid of the state's gas tax. It would simply roll back an increase approved last year by the legislature. It's a small increase, 3 cents a gallon.
If this question is passed, are you going to save taxpayers money?
No.
Steve Alward of Watertown is leading the Question 1 campaign. He says the driving force is not money, it's principle. The new gas tax includes, and here are the key words, an automatic increase. Every year as inflation goes up, so will the gas tax.
When you're talking about tax increases automatically going up, people don't like that. We don't want to set the precedent. That's one of the reasons we're fighting. We do not want a precedent between any tax and inflation.
I don't want to pay higher taxes. Nobody wants to. But like my father said, the money has to come from somewhere.
Representative David Linsky of Natick voted for the new gas tax because it will fund repairs to roads and bridges, like this one in his hometown. 2 years ago, it failed a safety inspection, and it's been closed to traffic, including emergency vehicles, ever since.
We're an old state, and the infrastructure is failing. And before the state would commit to replacing this bridge, they needed to find the money to do it. It's several $1 million to do. And unless there's enough money in the transportation fund, which comes from the gas tax, they can't do every bridge.
It's not that we are against increasing taxes. It's not that we're against road and bridge repair.
But Steve Alward says tax hikes to pay for anything shouldn't be automatic. They should be put to a vote. He says question 1 is about making lawmakers accountable.
The primary job that they're supposed to do is assess the finances and raise taxes or lower taxes according to the economic conditions of the time. But I think that anybody who doesn't want to take the vote and wants it to be automatic is not fit to be in office.
Why not vote on the gas tax annually?
We could do that. I mean, we really could.
But Representative Linsky says the need is critical. The automated gas tax hike, a small price to pay.
When you're looking at the amount of money that this indexing is, it's literally a couple dollars a year per driver. That's all that this question is talking about. And quite frankly, we need to make sure that we have the money available to fix bridges like this.
When it comes to the state's automatic gas tax hike, there's no bridging the different points of view. On Election Day, voters will have to pick a side.
So where does the rubber meet the road when it comes to question 1? Here to debate that are Kim Driscoll, has served as mayor of Salem since 2011 and opposes question 1, and State Representative Jeff Deal, who is a vocal supporter of question 1. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So when we hear the argument that it's not going to change how money is spent on infrastructure repairs like bridges, is that a valid complaint? If it's only a few cents, why not vote every year, if we need it, to increase the gas tax?
Well, that hasn't worked for the last 20 years. It's been 20 years since Massachusetts has taken up this issue. We know we're woefully unfunded when it comes to infrastructure improvements, especially around transportation. And it's just critical. Right now, Massachusetts is second worst in the country for bridge conditions. We know how much we have for infrastructure needs right here in my community, in Salem, a small community. I need $17 million to bring all of our roads up to a state of good repair. It's just too important, and it's too important to leave to politics. Unfortunately, I think over the last 20 years, whether we had Republican or Democratic administrations, we haven't adequately funded transportation, and the time is now.
Jeff, where are you on this?
Well, I just want to say the package actually says that we're going to roll back the 3 cents. We're not touching the 3 cent increase. We're actually just talking about the indexing going forward. And there's 3 points that we usually make, which is for yes on one. Is the first is that this is the only tax in Massachusetts that goes up without a representative vote at this point. Number two, the indexing to CPI is actually a formula tried in several states, and they've repealed it.
They have repealed it.
CPI actually factors the cost of gas in. When gas goes up, CPI goes up. But now in Massachusetts, as CPI goes up, gas will go up. It's sort of an ever increasing cycle. And the third thing is the state does have revenue coming in excess of what we expected, to the tune of $1.1 billion over the last 2 fiscal years. As far as priorities, we think that instead of bonding $1.2 billion for the expanded convention center, we should have addressed the $1 billion need they're talking about over the next 10 years for roads and bridges. And I agree with Mayor on the fact that we have 47th in the state on bridge condition, but we actually enacted what's called the Accelerated Bridge Program in 2008, running through 2016, $3 billion to address the bridges. If it's successful, all we need to do is vote again to reauthorize that.
So, I mean, it's only a handful of states have done this. And
That's correct.
So I think people are totally confused about what this question does, because it doesn't roll back the gas tax. It's still going to be 24 cents.
That's right.
It's just going to roll back. It's going to disallow future indexing tied to inflation. That's
so
it.
We're
It's
talking
nothing.
about over 10 years raising nearly $1 billion for transportation upgrades. We know what we need for bridges. We know what we need for roads. Having a reliable source of income every single year that you could work off of and plan for.
What if there's no inflation?
But it's not as though there's no transportation needs and there's just a snapshot
No, seriously, what
in
if there's
time.
no inflation?
Then you wouldn't have that sum of money coming in on an annual basis to meet the needs that we currently have. Because we haven't adequately funded something for 20 years, more than that, frankly, we know we're behind the 8 ball, and we need those dollars now to play catch up. So part of having it tied to the CPI is that if the economy is doing better, obviously you don't want to, or if the economy is doing worse, you wouldn't want to have a tax going up at that same time. So it's trying to find a trigger mechanism that recognizes where we are at economically. It may not be perfect, but relying on the legislature has proven over the last 2 decades that's not
They're
an
not
adequate
going to do it
way.
because they're afraid about their political
the politics
position.
of it. This is the most important function government plays. One of the most important function, critical. We all rely on transportation infrastructure, and for over 20 years we haven't had an increase.
Isn't that one of the reasons why the legislature voted it on this way? Because they don't want to be put in the position of voting on it every year, and it puts them in a bad position with their constituents.
Which doesn't make sense to me, because every year, we never put healthcare at risk or schools at risk when we have to vote the next year to increase funding for schools or healthcare. We take that vote if we need to, and that's all we're saying is just have a representative vote on a tax increase. The only tax increase in the state, like I said, now that goes up without a vote on a failed formula. And the other thing too is that report that talked about the condition of our bridges also talked about the spending in Massachusetts. We spend number 2 behind New Jersey in per road maintenance mile. We spend $675,000 compared to the average of $145,000. That's over $500,000 per road mile of 3,662 road miles in Massachusetts. We are spending an exorbitant amount of money on road funds, and yet here we are at 47th on bridges. Do the taxpayers get a refund for having bad service for being one of the most expensive, DOTs in the country?
I mean, I would just say to you that we know we have these needs. The vast majority of roads in the Commonwealth are local roads that are driven on by those of us within our own communities and surrounding communities. I'm responsible for the roads in my community, having more access to dollars for repaving, new sidewalks, the source of transportation upgrades that we all rely on. Whether it's waiting, longer to get to work or trying to pick up kids from school, we want a solid transportation system, and this certainly seems to be a way to get the dollars to do that in a way that recognizes that we haven't acted appropriately in the last 20 years.
And another way that we get funds to our local towns for construction is Chapter 90. So now the legislature, when we had more revenue coming in, did allocate from $200 million annually, roughly, they've been doing that for a while, to $300 million annually. The governor himself held back $100 million of those Chapter 90 road funds to cities and towns. So again, if the roads were in such bad shape, why did he hold back that? And the other thing too is you get back to the effect of families. This gas tax hits middle to low income families the hardest. They kind of call it a regressive tax because it hits them where they can't afford the more fuel efficient cars, generally. They usually, are getting to and from work in their car. They're picking up the kids, obviously taking them to activities, but also everything they buy is now going to be affected by the increase in transportation costs, including food. And the third thing is municipalities. I tried to do an amendment to exempt the municipalities from the increase. They have, school buses running, fire trucks and ambulances, police cars running 24/7. that cost to the towns has to be passed on to the consumer or the citizen as well through their property taxes. So it really kind of hits a family very hard.
So to be clear, cities are exempt from taxes on the gases that we pay now. So we don't pay for any of those local taxes that go forward. And the thing that we're missing is kicking this can down the road means it's only going to cost more later to make these repairs. And that does come up against things like police and fire and schools. This seems like a reliable source of revenue at a time when we need it, when the benefit of being a Commonwealth our age, and I'm from one of the most historic cities, is you get to tout that history. It also means you have a real aging infrastructure.
Question one, yay or nay? Kim Driscoll, thank you so much.
Yes
Jeff
on one
Deal.
for me.
No, for sure.